taxes, economic development, funding for schools. They all work together to build a thriving economy, high-paying jobs, a strong nation. But how do we achieve these goals?
For the last quarter century or so, we've had a grand experiment in the economy that's gone towards more deregulation, more letting the market take care of itself. The average American worker has actually seen their wages either stagnate or even decline over the last quarter century.
The economic development and tax policies of the last 30 years have shifted the burden of paying for vital services onto the backs of working people.
From a fairness standpoint, when you give corporations in particular tax breaks, you shift the burden of paying for government from those entities to individuals. So your firefighters and your teachers and your factory workers are going to pay a greater share of the costs of government as a result. And there's nothing fair about that. By exempting a multi-billion-dollar corporation from paying taxes while you're going after, say, Joe the plumber and making him pay more. And there's nothing fair about that.
Ineffective subsidies for corporations have wasted our tax dollars and reduced the resources available to invest in our communities.
Governments at all levels have done what I call giveaways to corporations. And local communities and states often give away property tax revenues to attract corporations. They claim they're going to create jobs or do all kinds of wonderful things, but they may leave town before any of that happens. So it becomes a huge drain on the local community.
Misguided economic policies have resulted in higher income disparities, higher poverty, higher debt, and government that can't work the way it should.
There's been a real middle-class squeeze for the last quarter century and a real growth in income inequality, where a very small percentage of people at the top have gotten a great deal richer, and a lot of people in the middle have either stagnated or lost ground to inflation.
But there is a solution. We must take the lead in creating a new economic future to invest in our schools and our communities, using a new common-sense strategy that incorporates a synchronized approach to tax policy, economic development policy, and funding for public education, or TEF.
TEF stands for Taxes, Economic Development, and Funding. And it really is a three-pronged approach. First, you've got to examine the taxes that are funding your schools. Are they broad-based? Are they low rates? Do they match other states? Are they producing enough revenue for your schools? Economic development is the second piece, and in many instances, states have given away huge subsidies and tax breaks to attract industry, and it's not exactly attracting the industry that they hoped it would. It may be just a subsidy without any return. And then long-term funding for education. Where do we want to take our education system? What kind of investment do we want to make long-term in our education future? Those three issues can control how successful an education system is in a state.
The basic premise of the TEF strategy is simple: a tax system that is fair and progressive, economic development policies that create a level playing field for all businesses, and funding for public education that is adequate and equitable.
The TEF concept that we've been working with is a recognition of a very simple idea that quality education depends on having a strong, growing economy. A strong, growing economy, on the other hand, depends on having a high-quality education system. And the link between these two is the funding of the educational structure.
The TEF strategy advocates tax policies that spread the responsibility of paying for the services we all need, so that corporations don't receive unfair tax breaks and working families are not overtaxed.
We need a tax system that rewards responsible companies and treats small businesses and local businesses fairly.
The next step in the TEF strategy is economic development policies that create a level playing field for all businesses, large and small.
For many years, there was one recipe for economic growth, and that was to cut taxes. And we've seen over the last 25 years that that really has not produced the kind of long-term stable productivity and prosperity that we would have expected. It just hasn't produced the kind of results that are helpful for our communities.
The final step in the TEF strategy is adequate and equitable funding for our public schools.
We can see now through studies that $1 invested in public education multiplies, and it multiplies at a faster rate than $1 of cutting taxes. That's a new paradigm for people, especially in the business community. So I'm excited that that research is out there and that we can begin to have the conversation about investing in public education as an economic development tool.
The measure of a good economy is job growth, income growth, and fair distribution of income. Investment in public education wins on all three counts.
Nations that spend the most on education tend to grow the fastest and have the strongest economy over the long term. States that have spent money on education all across the board tend to have the fastest growing economies and the most sustainable economies over the long term.
When you invest in education, you increase the earning power of your workforce. A high school graduate earns about $10,000 more than a high school dropout, and the annual earnings of a college graduate are about $34,000 more than a high school graduate.
A well-educated workforce has many economic benefits. We obviously have higher employment. We have more local and state and federal tax revenues. We have less crime, actually. When we do not invest adequately in education, there are many problems that we create for ourselves. Higher unemployment and crime and children in poverty and all of the major problems that poverty causes with inadequate nutrition and health care and on and on.
Investing in education is the clear path to prosperity. Skilled workers, more taxpayers, stronger communities, and a thriving economy.
What we should be asking is, do you want good schools? Do we value good schools for society, for economic development, just for the quality of life? And the answer will inevitably be yes.
If we have strong schools and strong families and strong communities, our quality of life is very high.
The TEF strategy of investing in education to build our economy provides a balanced approach to building America's future. And we can make this TEF strategy a reality. But we all need to get involved.
In order to properly fund education, education has to become a partner. They have to get involved in the conversation between business and its government about how education is funded. It has to be a partner in determining where the funding is going to come from, the long-term stability of the funding, and tax systems in general that have integrity and are supported over time.
This is a vital time for education leaders to go forth to their policymakers, their legislators, and their governor to make the case for education as an economic development tool in the very short term. They can argue very effectively, and should argue very effectively, that expenditures for education maintains the most vital asset of their community, their public school system.
By investing in public education, we can fulfill the promise of America. It's time to put these TEF policies on the right path. It's time to act.